where I would often have this thought, well, if they saw the things that I saw, understood the numbers, understood the business from where, they would understand why we're doing things the way we're doing, or why decisions are being made the way they are. And so I was like, well, what if we just expose them to everything?
Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Andreas Widmer, with my colleague, Rebecca Teddy. We're coming to you from the Entrepreneurship Center at the Catholic University of America's Bush School of Business. And this is Prosper, 30 minutes of the wisdom you need to flourish in business. I'm delighted to speak today with Thor Cheston. He is a native to the Washington, D.C. area, grew up here, went to Georgetown, won't hold that against him, had made his chops over more than a decade in the local hospitality industry, and is the founder and co-owner of Right Proper Brewing Company, the first brew pub in DC's historic Shaw neighborhood.
Under Thor's leadership, the brewery expanded to full-scale production, and he now has a full-scale facility and tap room that allows his products to go all over the DC area and Virginia, Delaware, all over the place. So Thor Cheston, welcome to Prosper.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Thor, the first warm-up question I always give to everybody is, what are you reading that you love? But I have to say, because forgive me, because I'm going to ask you a question that you must get all the time and hate, but our listeners rather, are going to be so curious.
My name.
Is there a story behind the name Thor?
So my maternal grandmother, her family emigrated from Norway. And my parents they thought it was a great name. So I very much predated the movies. Let's put it that way. How old am I? 47. So yeah, I predate.
No, you have you come by it honestly, the Norwegian stock.
I do.
So that's good.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a good, strong name. So anyway, what are you reading that you love?
Well, I tend to read multiple books at a time, and I tend to reread books. Andreas, I'm actually rereading your book, Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, right now.
That's a product placement, the first one.
Oh no, it was great. And then from that, I'm now reading Good Profit as well. And so I'm finding them, on second look, just very, very rewarding. And then also on the spiritual side of things, I'm reading Saved in Hope by Pope Benedict the 16th, one of his papal encyclicals, and that is just an absolute joy.
Yeah, that's my absolute favorite encyclical. I love it, and I go back to it periodically. It's a good thing for we happen to be recording. Well, our listeners won't hear this until after the Christmas season, but we happen to be recording during Advent, and that's a great thing to be reading right now.
It is wonderful. It truly is.
It's reading Benedict is like, honey on my lips. He's the sweetest writer, but the most straightforward. Out of all these popes that we had recently, you would think that he would be the most difficult to read, being the kind of brain he's the brainiac out of all of them. But he's actually the most straightforward to read.
He's very, very clear as a communicator, and, he does get well into deep theological concepts, and they come up. It's a very clear message throughout. I love it. Absolutely love it.
And then the other book, Good Profit, I have to say, I get some slack that I recommend this book and Charles Koch and everything. And look, I'm not involved in politics. I think actually now he isn't either. But anyway, I just call a spade. And that is, when I see a good business book, I'll tell you about it. And that is one of the best business books I've ever read. And the premise is you have to dig a little bit, but the premise is kind of saying, if a company were structured like the U.S. Declaration of Independence, how would it look like? If you would found a company around the same principles, how would you do it? And I think that's eminently interesting. And if you look at the result of what he did, I think it's very successful.
as a business owner myself, I tend to read a lot of business books, and for each one, I take what's useful for me, and I forget the rest. And there's plenty of very, very, very useful information in there. And who knows? I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna. You can't take away from the content just because of someone's political
Exactly.
history.
No, and I think we should, like what St. Paul said, to test everything and to retain what's good.
Exactly.
But listen, the other thing, other than the book, and we could do a whole show on the books. I know you're an avid reader, right, like us. But the other part we'd love to do is always talk about the sort of the origin stories. We all have these winding paths to bring us where we are, and we find that these are very interesting, but also inspiring, because people become entrepreneurs who never thought of being one. And so I'd love to hear what brought you to start and run Right Proper Brewing.
The idea of owning something entirely that was, working in a business that was entirely my own, always was very attracted to me. Kind of that soup to nuts, being in charge of every detail of something was, I thought, to be quite a creative endeavor, and that always was very attracted to me. But just kind of thinking about my own career, and I graduated from Georgetown thinking that I wanted to become I graduated with a liberal arts degree. I tell people I learned how to read and write while at Georgetown, and that was a fantastic education. But coming out of it, I was, I wanted to help people, and I like the idea of being useful to people. And I had a good friend of mine whose her parents were doctors, and they were just they were very, very inspiring individuals in their ability to really affect other people's lives. And so I looked into that field. I went back to Georgetown to work on a 2-year post-bac pre-med program. I didn't have any of the sciences that were prerequisites necessary to take the MCAT. So I went back to do those classes. And then I think it was, midway through the second year, and I'm starting to look at the schedule for the MCAT and when am I going to take the test, and, kind of hemming and hawing on it. And I had a conversation with my mother, just about life and goals and things like that. And I said, it'd be really cool to, after I retire from the medical field, to open a brewery. Because at that point I had really kind of discovered, better beer, maybe for lack of a better term. And I was really enjoying, just learning about new beers and the history of beers and things like that. So I thought it'd be fun to own a brewery. And she said, well, if that's the end goal, why don't you do that now? So she's, the best mom ever.
Oh, that's a wise mama.
That's the famous classic, right? Where the guy in the I tell this story sometimes. The ancient philosopher meets, I don't know which king it was, and says, "Where are you going?" And he's going into battle and everything. And he asks him why, and at the end the guy says, "Well, so I can be at home at peace with my family." And he says, "Why don't you just go home right now?" And in a way, Mom said, "Why don't you just start a brewery now?" Because
yeah. I pretty much started the planning process, right afterwards. I had been working at a pizzeria Paradiso in Georgetown to kind of help, pay bills during while I was in school. And I went to go work there more, and I started managing, and I thought that a great way to start a beer brand in Washington, D.C. would be to open a brew pub, which is a brewery and restaurant combined. And, D.C. didn't really have kind of a neighborhood gathering place like a brew pub. There's a lot of kind of brew pub culture out west, and D.C. really didn't have that. And what I loved about D.C. is that it, it's made up of these all these little historic neighborhoods, and people who are residents of the District of Columbia, you ask them where they live, and they tell you the name of their neighborhood, and they're very proud of that, and a lot of times these neighborhoods have their own kind of identity and little microeconomies, and I thought that the addition of a brew pub, that a true third space for people could really add a lot of value to one of these neighborhoods.
So you started right with that, or did you first do like home brewing or something, or?
Oh, I tried to homebrew a little bit. I was terrible at it. Destroyed my mother's kitchen a couple times, and so I realized that I wasn't going to be the brewer, but I could. I worked in the hospitality industry for about, I think it was like 13 years before, and then in 2011 I quit my job to concentrate full time on raising the money and writing the business plan for the brew pub. And during that time, I really got to know the ins and outs of the restaurant industry and the restaurant business plan, which is really what a brew pub is. It really is a restaurant first. It just happens to produce a lot of its own saleable product. And realizing that the economics of the brew pub could be quite favorable, where if a large portion of your sales come from your house brewed beer, then it really creates a tremendous cash flow is possible. And so we did realize that. So, we opened in December of 2013, and the first couple years, I think our average was 38% of our sales came from our house brewed beer, which had a profit margin of about 94%.
What's just for everybody else, and I know, Thor, that we have lots of people who are interested in the food and hospitality industry. So in I would say in a retail store on something like beer or food, there is probably about a 50% margin or 40% margin, would you say? And in a restaurant, what is it?
If purchased alcohol, let's say, you want to be in the high teens or low 20s at the max for cost of goods.
But in a restaurant,
Yeah, in a restaurant.
so you have 98% margin, and what somebody who buys it and sells it has what?
So if their cost of goods is 30%, their margin is 70.
So I know that it has to be over 50% because there's a lot of other costs that go
Yep.
into this. And in a retail, if you sell something in a retail, it's I mean, I don't know the food, but in my day it was over 50%.
Yes, I think larger retailers like Trader Joe's, Giant Food, they'll operate between, I think, probably 22 and 25% margin.
Boy, that's razor
Yeah.
thin.
That's
Yeah,
right.
razor
Yeah,
thin.
absolutely.
So anyway, so you go in and you start to see that that in a sense you make more money with the beer production than with the restaurant.
Yeah, so we got way too big for our britches. We did, in terms of beer production and sales, we did year one what we had projected to do year 10. And so we immediately started thinking, okay, what's next? And then within 2 years, in 2015, we opened a production and manufacturing business so we could start distributing our beers. That was in Brooklyn, just a stone's throw from Catholic University. The problem was we had no idea how to run a manufacturing business. We for that time period, we really tried to manage it as though it were a restaurant. And so there was a lot of sunk costs, I would say. There were, we chased revenue streams that, just didn't appear. The market for craft beer was actually, in a big change at that point. When we opened the brew pub, there were about 2,800 breweries, or actually 2,300 breweries, I believe it was, in the United States. 2 years later, it was approaching 6,000, and now it's almost 10,000. And so really kind of the market for craft beer was really changing in that there were just so many other options. It was becoming hyper localized.
Yeah, and the market didn't grow. The market
The
didn't grow, but
market
the
didn't
units grew. Yeah,
grow. Yeah,
the providers
so
grow.
yeah, yeah. The production capacity, the overall production capacity in the country grew tremendously. There's a lot more equipment that could make beer. However, the number of beer drinkers never changed. And so, and right now the craft beer market is an absolute free fall. A lot of small breweries are going out of business as a result of that, because they built facilities that unfortunately are very expensive to maintain or too expensive to maintain, and they don't have the production they don't have the production to justify it and the sales to justify
It's a
those
very,
facilities.
um, I'm super interested in your field. We have a lot of food entrepreneurs, and on the one hand, it can be a beautiful and lucrative business, but man, this is very unforgiving. We've had several, like especially during COVID, we had several companies, several of our partner companies that we mentor and help went bankrupt because of exactly this thing you say. This very unforgiving if you make the wrong investments. And I think it's interesting. We can go about it a bit afterwards about your product strategy and everything. But I think what I would want to hold here is, did you ditch the restaurant altogether, or did you become a pure brewery? Or
No. The restaurant, the restaurant's open still, and then we have a little tap room that is attached to our production facility. So we have two retail outlets.
Very cool. Let me take a pause right there and we'll come back because I would love to talk about how you weathered this big change in market. If I just want to invite you listeners, if you're enjoying this podcast, to really support us by make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons and maybe leave us a review, and maybe even better, send a link to and a recommendation to your friends. It really helps us. And then the other thing I want to do is invite you to join our Family Business Consortium. It's free to join. It's a product of the Entrepreneurship Center here at the Bush School of Business. And you'll be part of a community of family entrepreneurs united in addressing the unique challenges, but also the unique growth opportunities of families in business. Those are unique complexities, but also unique opportunities for growth, both in business and in holiness. And particularly, I would love to invite you to campus, or you can attend online, but come to our Spring Family Business Consortium meeting. It'll be on April 17th, 2026, and you can go to familybusinessconsortium.org to find more about that, or we'll put a link in the show notes. But we'd love to see you there, hopefully in person, and if not, online. And with that, let's get back to our conversation with Thor Cheston.
welcome back to Prosper and our conversations with Thor Cheston, who is the co-owner of Right Proper Brewing Company in Washington, D.C.
Thor, we think there's so many things to learn from your experiences at Right Proper, and especially as we were talking about before the break about how your approach has developed over time. So let's just pick right back up there.
Like I said, we tried to run the production, the manufacturing business like it was a restaurant for about 4 years. And we really had no idea what we were doing, as I said. And so what we realized is that we were trying to, we had too many products, and our approach to that product development was kind of like making the beers that we wanted to make. And expecting the market outside to adjust to who we were. So it was really kind of a creative endeavor first, rather than a kind of a market driven business. And that works when we're a brew pub, because we're in 100% control of the environment. I mean, somebody is coming to our space, we control everything. Everything from the music to the how the staff is trained to, and when they're in our environment, it's our job to create that experience, and the products that we have there are really kind of part of that experience. Whereas when we're selling to someone outside and they're taking our product off a shelf and they're bringing it home, we are being invited into their space, and so we really need to be welcomed into their space, as someone, as something that they need. We weren't really listening to what people needed. It was more us telling them what we liked.
Yeah, that's one of the top. Rebecca and I teach this class, and every student, like 230 students, just now finished their first business project. That's the most difficult switch in business to just say, hey, look, this is what I like, to turning and say, well, what would you like? This is what we say. How may I help you? Like to this empathy, like to go into the empathy mode rather than the self-centered mode is the trick to create a growing business.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
what caused
And
that?
from whom did you learn? Like who did you ask? From whom did you learn how to make the switch?
It was frustration, realizing that we weren't getting the traction, that we had. I mean, our brew pub was a smashing success. I mean, within 5 years, we were debt free. We had all of our investors were very more than happy. I mean, and so it was a shock when we would go into, bring a portfolio of beers into like a brewery, into a restaurant or bar that we didn't own, and try and sell them, and they had no idea who we were, and we were trying to tell our story, and so it was, beginning to take a hard look at, like, okay, well, who are our customers really? Let's go ahead and define our customer. And I said, so I looked at our revenue, and I looked at where our revenue was coming from. And in 2018, over 60% of our revenue came from our DC distributor. So that I said, well, that's our customer. That's our one customer. That's the most important customer. So we need to figure out what we need, what we can do for them. How can we make their job easier? What do they need from us? What are they lacking? Is there something that we can do for them to make their job easier? Is there a tool we can give them so that they can make money? And so we approached it with them. I immediately I looked at all of our sales, and I cut our schedule of beers. I think it was like 16 or something like that. I cut it down to the four top sellers. And then I had a meeting with our DC distributor, and I said, these are your four top selling beers from us. These are the only beers I'm going to ask you to sell. If we decide to make something kooky or a little seasonal or something like that, it's our responsibility to sell it. And then I asked them for feedback. And then I asked them, what can we do for them? And from that conversation, they told us they needed a certain style of beer, and we got to work on that right away. And they told us from what I shared with them, what was the most effective tool for them, which was, our pale ale called Raised by Wolves. And so we went all in on making that beer. And that was, making sure that it was always available, consistent, and that it was packaged appropriately for them, so that it was an easy sell for them when they were, it looked great on a store shelf. It had all the information necessary so that it could be sold everywhere from Costco to, the corner liquor store.
See, I see so many. I know your story, of course, so I see so many beautiful teaching tips here. And you sort of fly over the territory, but you say consistent. Say a word about what you mean by consistent.
Yeah. So, we're creating a brand. And so when people interact with that brand, they need to have the same experience over and over and over again. They can't be left guessing. And that, that's really, we hit a very magic point with our pale ale, because it really was our best selling beer. And so we had to make it a lot. And our brew house is small. Our production facility is small relatively. And so we had to brew it constantly to keep up with demand. And that meant that the beer was always fresh on the shelves. And so people really got used to that very fresh, well-made beer experience. And so we took a hard look at our equipment and our process to make sure that we really were making it as consistent as possible. We went from like a creative driven business model to one that was much more leadership focused. And it was, when it was creatively focused, it was all based around the head brewer that we had at the time. And when that wasn't working, we had to shift to a leadership business model. And I had to say, okay, well, who's going to be the leader? And I decided it had to be me. And so when we started to make these changes, we also had to make a lot of significant changes in the rest of our management team as well, so that they were online.
Can you say a little bit about that? Because that's like, especially when we're talking about people of character who want to be doing good in business. Sometimes, though, there are times of separation, and I always ask the question, like, how would Jesus fire someone, right? So, in a way, I'm asking you that question, right? Like, how do you do that? That must be painful. Say a little bit for the benefit of others about what you've learned from that experience.
What I have found, that's such a good question, Rebecca. How would Jesus fire people? I can't answer that question. What I have found that works for me is that when you give parameters and you establish leadership and you give people parameters, you set boundaries and you set expectations immediately. A lot of people who are not used to conforming to those will fire themselves. I will say they will remove themselves. They will either move on or create an excuse to not be here. And I started making these changes very quickly, and there were a few people on our management team that they felt that all of a sudden they were being held accountable immediately, and it made them extremely uncomfortable, and they had to exit.
Thor, I can't tell you, and all the listeners, that this all rings bells to me. That I know that bell very well because it's the same bell that goes off when I listen to Art Sioka. You do two things we just went through. The one thing is you identified long-term value creation and went with the business rather than with your small preference, in a sense, where Art went with mass production of wine and with the boxed wine. And he adapted the wine to the palate of the American people. That was his two great inventions. And he did that because he worked with the channel. Like, he actually did speak to the end user and started to do like what you do, saying, well, what do you like? What do you like? And so he changed that. The other thing, and the proof is in the pudding there. And I think with you, it is, and will even more be in the future. And the other thing that I hear you say is, you put what he would call, put your flag, your value so high, you put such a big flag up to tell everybody what you're all about, that people who don't like that, they don't even show up at your door. And those who are in, they're going to leave, right? So Art says, I never really had to fire anybody because I was so open and so in your face about my values. Yep. People were just annoyed with me and they just walked away.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah, we started saying that, so-and-so fired themselves, that they, we gave this, you can either do this or you don't. And then
I could talk for hours with you, and we have in the past, but I need to get a few other things in. So I had the privilege, folks, to go and visit Right Proper and had a proper company tour. And it's really a sight to behold. You have to go check this out, especially the brew pub, which they share with a coffee. So they have coffee and beer, and it's a beautiful, a true neighborhood place, right? Close to CUA, you could just walk over there. It's along the subway there on the other side of CUA. Anyway, and so Thor invited me to the tour and then to the staff meeting. And that's a staff meeting like I have not seen before, because it involved you standing on a table at the wall. Tell me a little bit And you, this is what one of the things I also love is you.
Yeah.
It's what you call extreme transparent, radical transparency.
Well, I think
Tell
you
us
gave it
about.
that term, Professor Widmer, if you don't mind me calling that.
You didn't give that term,
No, you did.
This is from you, Andreas.
Yeah, you did. You did. So
but it is radical.
So we made a strong shift into a leadership management style. We identified who our customers were, which are just our distributors. Our job was to make our distributors' jobs easier, giving them the tools that they needed so that their businesses could run more effectively. And then, and so I had to communicate from our distributors to our production staff and our management team here. This is what the plan is. This is what we're doing. This is where the demand is. And things started to shift, and I started to have some very uncomfortable conversations with some of our management team, because I realized that they were making some assumptions because they saw big changes happening, and that they were making assumptions about our business that were incorrect. And so I would almost daily in this kind of defensive position, where I would often have this thought, well, if they saw the things that I saw, understood the numbers, understood the business from where, they would understand why we're doing things the way we're doing, or why decisions are being made the way they are. And so I was like, well, what if we just expose them to everything, really bring them in? And I was a good friend of mine owns the largest brewery in Washington, D.C., D.C. Brow Brewing Company. And we go on a long run together every Saturday morning. And we have been doing this for, I think, 5 years now. And on one of our runs, he mentioned what he called open book management as a management style. And I didn't know what that was, but I was intrigued. I Googled it when I got home, and I found a book called The Great Game of Business, written by Jack Stack from the Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation. And it was very inspiring, and it was a management platform. It was a structure of management that it involved sharing the financial information of the company throughout the company with everyone, teaching them what that financial information means, and how to use that information. So there's real kind of financial literacy that goes with it, and then making them equity partners in the positive outcomes. So if we hit our benchmarks, if we hit our budget numbers, that we all participate in the win. And so I worked with a financial coach. His name is Larry Chase. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. I highly recommend him. And he came in and kind of onboarded us with this. Now, when Larry left us, it was, we have a printer going off here. I apologize. When Larry left us, we did everything online. And so we had a Google Doc, and I had a projector, and we would meet. The team would meet together every Friday morning in our tap room, and we would open up the Google Doc on a projector, and we would go through a forecasting. And I decided to take it one step further beyond that. And I think this is where it becomes unique to me, where I had the thought, well, the result was everyone had a big eye-opening experience. There was this kind of collective, oh, you're not rich. And they understood how profit is generated, how cash is generated. We taught them, and we reinforced this every week. And then they learned how their job specifically factors into the overall health of the company. And so there is a direct line of sight between their daily work and the overall health of the business. And then we talk about that profit is not the purpose of the business. We have a purpose statement. We have a mission statement that gets us to the purpose statement. And then within the mission statement is a word, and that word is company. And that company is represented by our profit and loss statement. And that company does not exist, and therefore our mission does not exist, and therefore our purpose cannot be realized if that profit and loss statement does not have a black number at the bottom of it. And so we link everything together. And so we've been doing it for 2.5 years. It has freed up a tremendous amount of my time. It has refocused me. So I no longer have to come to work worrying that people don't understand. And I didn't have this defensive stance. And if you only knew that these were the types of things that were in my head all the time. Now everyone knows. Everyone knows how they fit specifically into the health of the company. And they also now know the goals of the company and where we're headed, what we're trying to achieve, and how we're going to get there. And it's all based in the numbers. So all our financial language became a financial language.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to come and talk to our accounting classes, because folks, see, if you do accounting and he takes out the projector and the Google sheet and the project it on the wall, everybody's eyes glaze over. Okay, that's a presentation. No, what we're talking about is him standing on a table, and there's a big whiteboard on the wall.
Four giant whiteboards all together.
Yeah.
And so that was the next step for me. I said, okay, it was extremely effective for our staff. I said, what if I took this another step further? What if I made it public? What if I put an abbreviated version of our P&L statement, which we call our scoreboard, up on huge whiteboards, so that literally anyone standing in our tap room can look through a window into our brewery and see our cash flow. Now, I don't know how many people, standing in there drinking, a beer and looking at that understand what all those numbers mean. But what we do is when we give brewery tours, that's the last stop on the tour, is we stop by the scoreboard and I run them through a financial exercise. And so they get an idea of how the business of brewing beer actually works. And that gives them a really full context behind it. It takes kind of like the mythology and the romanticism, out of it. And it makes it real, very concrete. And I have to tell you, in the 2 years that I've been doing this, or actually this is maybe about 1 full year that I've been really running tours by, it's what people say is the most effective, what they remember most about the tour is that portion of it. And so everyone that comes, I invite everyone to the brewery to sit in on one of our huddles or for a private tour. And so all of our distribution partners, all of their employees I do this with. I've had multiple city council members running them through financial exercises so that they can see the actual realities of what it means to run a manufacturing business in their district.
And it teaches people what a P&L really is and how it works and why it's important.
Yes, and I can tell you definitively it has affected legislation in this city.
I imagine, because you hear so much, I mean, with all due respect to people, just complete nonsense about, what owners are like. And so I was laughing to myself when you said that your employees had that experience of just, oh, you're not rich, right? And to see what the narrow margins are, and a lot, like, you're doing a wonderful civic good in addition to whatever else you might be doing by just educating council members about what it takes to actually run a business.
Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. Like, I realized how powerful this was, and I realized, I was like, oh, I have a responsibility now. I need to be doing this not just with our own team, but with everyone, because it really is truly informative. It really is truly informative. And I've had everyone from, members of the city council to, managers at grocery stores, to individuals saying, I'm taking this back to finish the statement, and I'm gonna try and affect change where I'm coming from or where I work or even my family. It's really inspiring.
if somebody's listening and is like inspired now by what you just said about this radical transparency, where do you start? Did you just like open the book one day and say, okay, here it is? Or did you introduce people slowly? Give me a first step.
Yeah, well, I read the book Great Game of Business. That was very important. And then I found a financial coach who was very familiar with Great Game of Business, and he helped us implement it. And so it was a multi-month implementation. One of the effects of that is it was kind of the last puzzle piece we needed to completely transform the management structure of this business. As We had two people in high up in our production team, and we even had an owner exit the business as a result of the implementation of the open book management, because the whole process shines a big light on every single person in the team, and it requires them to report what their contribution is to the overall health of the company. And if that is not a very clear, straight answer, they get boxed in. There's nowhere for that. They can't move, and they exit.
It's an accountability both of you as an owner, but also of everybody else. It's and that, again, to go back to Art Sioka's, he wanted accountability. He says, get rid of politics and introduce accountability. There's one short way to do that, and that is exactly what you did.
I mean, it was extreme, and it is very. I mean, it really helped me as well. I mean, I know how to read a P&L and a balance sheet and a cash flow statement. But I can tell you, because I am now in charge of educating our staff on a weekly basis, I have to focus on it. I'm holding myself accountable so that I cannot get complacent and just show up to work. I have to actually do the research myself so that I have something to report to the staff because they're expecting it. And it's made me better at my job. I mean, I can show you. I know there's a video component. Here we go. So this is a old school lined notebook. And so
I took a couple of pictures. I run them by you, Thor, and then you can approve them that we can put them in. Yeah.
So this is it's with a pencil, and I go through. I'm responsible for forecasting some of our scoreboard each week. So all the department heads are responsible for each line of the P&L. They have to report. So we're managing the business looking forward rather than looking backward. So each line of the profit and loss statement, a different manager is in charge of. We have four department heads, and the whole P&L statement is broken up amongst the four of them. And they have to do the research during the week and report live where they think we're actually going to perform at the end of the financial period versus where our budget is. And so, we may have a budget of $100,000 in wholesale revenue for this period. That was the budget that we came up with at the start of the year. But now that we're 11 months into the year, how are we actually going to perform? Given what we know.
So Thor, how is business going? How is the industry, and then how is your business?
Our business is our manufacturing business is going great. We're having a tremendous year over year. We were able to install a lot of efficiency into our systems and also grow our market share in the same year. The overall beer industry in Washington, D.C. is down, especially craft beer. Our sales are actually up this year, and our profitability is much, much higher. Through this open book management, we've really become very good at laser focus on cost of goods and efficiencies, and finding those kind of departmental drivers, those, what are the factors in sales? What are the factors in production that really drive profitability? And by zeroing in on those, we've had a tremendous effect on our bottom line. So year over year, our EBITDA profit is up, I think, 270% year over year. And so it's extremely encouraging. And now, we have a lot of really great things on the horizon where, right now demand for our products exceeds our ability to produce the beer. So we have to outsource our production about 9 months out of the year is really what we're doing when we're doing that. And so I brought in a third party accountant, an objective point of view, someone that specialized in small scale manufacturing. He's very familiar with breweries. He owned and operated a brewery for a while. And what he did is a whole profit analysis of what it would cost to bring all of our production within our own overhead costs. And, the result is it's much, much, much more profitable, with our contribution margin fully crossed. Any additional packaged production out of our facility here runs at a much higher profit margin than everything before it. And so we have the ability to, we're projecting about 200,000 in EBITDA profit this year. And with a 19.4% growth over the next 4 years, we can double our profit. So we'll be just over $400,000 in profit with just a 19% increase in revenue. And so it's extremely encouraging. We're actually in fundraising for that right now. We have a financial model built around that. And so we're very excited for the future.
These are all beautiful problems to have. I know they are a headache, but these are beautiful problems to have. And I think the proof, as they say, is not in the pudding, but in the beer. So I encourage everybody to see it. But we keep our episodes short because I know you all who listen, you're entrepreneurs and you are busy. But the downside of that is we're going to have Thor back because we don't have enough time with our guests. There's lots of other things I would like to talk with you about. But thank you, Thor, so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm a recent convert to the Catholic faith, as you know. And I had this moment where I'm like, well, how do I reconcile my Catholic faith with running a for-profit business? And, with a lot of Googling,
yeah.
Actually not too much Googling, I found a neighbor and realizing that, the business school at Catholic University is very Catholic, and learning through leadership over there, including yourself, Andreas, that, when you talk about the free market economy and Catholic social teaching and how those two come together in such a beautiful, beautiful way. I mean, had I not already been Catholic, I would have converted.
That's wonderful. Listen, before we go, Thor, tell us, we'll have, links to your brew pub and tap room in the show notes. But are you on LinkedIn or something like that? Where can listeners who would like to contact you and maybe learn some more about this management style, which is so cool?
I'm not on LinkedIn. I'm not. But they can, honestly, if someone wants to just call me, I'm an open book. I'm more than happy to chat. I love it when people come to visit. And I love being helpful. So, please reach out.
I can vouch for that. Thor, I'm a super fan. Thank you.
Oh, I am too. This is great. I'm a big fan of your podcast too. I listened to the one with Professor Egan, and that was great. He was helping me with some marketing stuff, and I think it was 2018, and it was very inspiring working with him. He has a tremendous sense of
I remember.
story.
Yeah, he said that he worked with you in the past. Yeah,
it was great. Yeah.
Well, folks, that's all we have. Thank you, listeners, for spending this quick 40, maybe 50 minutes with us. Take care. And always, until next time, in your spirit and your business, we hope